The betrayal's cruel engine I saved for his life, he bought her a car. Chapter 1. The Diagnosis and the Promise. Atlanta, Georgia, 2023. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to me like a second skin as I sat in Dr. Evans's office, the hum of the fluorescent lights a dull drone in my ears. Across from me, my husband, David, held my hand, his grip surprisingly firm, belying the shock etched on his face. He was 58, vibrant, a man who had always prided himself on his strength and vitality, but now that vitality seemed to have drained away, replaced by a terrifying fragility. "The biopsy results are back, Mr. Miller," Dr. Evans said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's pancreatic cancer, stage 2. The words hit me like a physical blow. Pancreatic cancer, the silent killer. My mind reeled. David, my David, who I had shared 25 years of my life with, through thick and thin, through triumphs and heartaches, he was the rock, the steady presence. How could this be happening? David went pale, but he didn't crumble. He was a successful architect, a man of logic and order. "What are our options, doctor?" he asked, his voice steady, though I could feel a tremor in his hand. Dr. Evans explained the grim statistics, the aggressive nature of the disease. But then a glimmer of hope. "There's a clinical trial at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, Massachusetts," she explained. "It's a cutting-edge immunotherapy showing promising results for some patients with stage 2. It's aggressive, experimental, and incredibly expensive. But it offers the best chance at long-term remission." "Expensive?" I interjected, my voice barely a whisper. Our health insurance was decent, but I knew experimental treatments often fell into a gray area. "Very," Dr. Evans confirmed, her gaze sympathetic. "The initial estimates are around $500,000 for the full course of treatment, not including travel and accommodation in Boston for several months. Insurance will cover a portion, but a significant amount will be out of pocket. We're talking at least $200,000 to $300,000 after insurance, potentially more if there are complications or extended stays." My heart sank. $200,000 to $300,000. It was a staggering sum. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't struggling either. David had a successful career, and I had worked for years as a graphic designer before scaling back to part-time freelance work. We had a comfortable retirement nest egg, a solid amount in savings, and equity in our suburban Atlanta home. It wasn't readily liquid, but it was there. His life was worth every penny, every single penny. "We'll do it," I said, my voice firming with resolve. "Whatever it takes, David. We'll find the money. We'll fight this." David squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Sarah," he murmured, his eyes locking with mine, filled with a mixture of fear and profound gratitude. "I know it's a lot. It's your life, David," I replied, the tear tracing a path down my cheek. "Nothing is more important." Over the next few weeks, our lives became a blur of consultations, second opinions, and financial planning. We met with our financial advisor, John, a trusted family friend. He laid out the options, drawing heavily from our savings, potentially taking out a second mortgage on the house, liquidating some long-term investments. It would devastate our retirement plans, but David's life was paramount. "We need to be aggressive with this, Sarah," John advised. "Start liquidating now. The market is unpredictable, and you'll need the funds readily available for these treatments. Every penny counts." I took charge. David, despite his outward strength, was often exhausted and overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the diagnosis. I was the pragmatist, the organizer, the one who navigated the paperwork and the financial labyrinth. I began systematically transferring funds from our joint investment accounts into a high-yield savings account dedicated solely to his treatment. I sold off some stock. I even dipped into my own personal savings, accumulated over years of freelance work, which I had intended for a dream art studio renovation. It felt insignificant compared to David's life. Within 3 months, I had amassed a substantial sum, just over $250,000 in the dedicated account. It was a relief, a tangible symbol of our fight. The initial plan was for David to start the trial in Boston in early spring. He had gone through initial rounds of chemotherapy here in Atlanta to stabilize his condition, which had taken a toll on him, leaving him often weak and nauseous. He deserved a reprieve, a hope. The Boston team wants to do one final round of local tests before you head up there, David. I told him one evening, laying out the travel plans. It's just standard procedure to ensure you're a good candidate for the trial's specific protocol. He nodded, looking tired but resolute. Okay, Sarah, whatever they need. A week later, David left for the local clinic for these final tests. I kissed him goodbye, promising to have his favorite meal ready when he returned. I spent the day cleaning, preparing for his upcoming journey, humming a hopeful tune. The dedicated savings account, $250,000 earmarked for his survival, felt like a beacon of hope. That evening, David returned, looking surprisingly invigorated, almost triumphant. Good news, Sarah, he announced, wrapping an arm around me. The Boston trial has been slightly delayed. They found a new, even more promising variant of the immunotherapy that's just been approved for trials in Miami, Florida. It's closer, less disruption, and the preliminary results are even better. My heart swelled with relief. Miami, that was closer, less stressful travel. That's wonderful, David. Truly wonderful. When do you start? They're still finalizing the protocols, he explained, a slight evasiveness in his eyes that I didn't register at the time. It might be a few more weeks, maybe a month or two, but it means less travel, Sarah, less stress for both of us, and a better chance. He smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a genuine, carefree smile. I hugged him tightly, tears of joy welling in my eyes. The money in the account, still untouched, was now waiting for an even better outcome. Our fight, our future, felt brighter than ever. I was so wrapped up in the good news, in the hope for his recovery, that I completely missed the subtle shift in his demeanor, the slight change in his narrative, the fleeting look in his eyes that held a secret I was about to uncover, a secret that would shatter not just my hope, but every belief I had held about our life together. The money I had meticulously saved for his life was about to become the instrument of my deepest betrayal. Chapter 2, The Unraveling Thread. The news of the Miami clinical trial, seemingly a stroke of luck, brought a palpable lightness back into our home. David seemed to rebound almost immediately. His energy returned, his appetite improved, and the dark cloud of despair that had hung over him since the diagnosis seemed to dissipate. He was vibrant again, almost like his old self, but with an unfamiliar undercurrent of secrecy. He started spending more time at the office, even on weekends, claiming he needed to wrap up projects before the extended time off for his treatment. He was always vague about the specifics of the Miami trial, the doctors, the exact start date. He dismissed my questions with reassurances. "They'll call you when they have a definite schedule, Sarah. No need to worry your pretty head about the details." This dismissive tone, so unlike his usual open communication, should have been a red flag. But I was so consumed by hope for his recovery, so relieved to see him return to health, that I pushed my unease aside. I, too, felt a sense of reprieve. With the immediate pressure of the Boston trip lifted, I resumed more of my freelance graphic design work. I still checked the dedicated savings account regularly. Seeing the $250,000 sitting there, a tangible symbol of our commitment to his health, it was a comforting sight. Then the small changes began to accumulate, like tiny unraveling threads in the fabric of our life. David started receiving more calls on his cell phone that he would take in another room, speaking in hushed tones. He became more meticulous about his appearance, buying new clothes, getting his hair cut more frequently. He had always been well-groomed, but this felt like an over-attentiveness, an almost desperate effort to present a rejuvenated image. He occasionally smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, a sweet floral scent that lingered on his shirts. I dismissed it as him perhaps passing by someone wearing a strong scent. I was a woman deeply in love, deeply worried about her husband's health, and perhaps deeply naive. One afternoon, while David was supposedly at the office, a text message came through on his iPad, which he had left on the kitchen counter. He was usually meticulous about keeping his devices private, but he must have forgotten in his haste. The notification popped up on the screen, a bubble from an unsaved number. "Can't wait to see you, my love. The new car is a dream. Thank you, darling. You're the best. XOXO, Lisa." My blood ran cold. New car, my love, Lisa. My hands trembled as I picked up the iPad. I knew it was wrong, a violation of privacy, but a sickening dread had already begun to unfurl in my stomach. I opened the message. It was a string of texts from the same unsaved number, stretching back weeks. The first few were innocent enough, work-related, then increasingly personal. "Missing you. Thinking of our weekend." Then the explicit ones, terms of endearment, plans for secret rendezvous, references to gifts, and then the car. Multiple photos of a sleek red sports car, a brand new Mercedes convertible, parked in various locations, outside a fancy restaurant, by a beach, in what looked like a suburban driveway I didn't recognize, and the captions, "My baby. Thanks again, darling. It's perfect. Best gift ever." Each photo, each loving message, was a brutal punch to the gut. My David, my husband, who was supposedly fighting for his life, who I was sacrificing our retirement for, who I had poured every available penny into saving. He wasn't in Miami, preparing for a life-saving clinical trial. He was buying a luxury car for another woman, with my money, with our money, the money I had meticulously saved for his treatment, the money I had envisioned giving him a second chance at life. I felt a scream building in my throat, but it never escaped. My vision blurred, a dizzying haze of betrayal and disbelief. The air in our quiet kitchen, once filled with hope, now felt thick with lies and deceit. I scrolled further, past the car photos, past the declarations of love. There were bank transfer notifications, large sums, transfers to Lisa Reynolds, not just for the car, but for other things, expensive dinners, a weekend getaway to Naples, Florida, designer clothes, and then the ultimate blow, a transfer dated just a week ago, a direct payment of $180,000 to Luxury Auto Group, Miami branch, the exact amount needed for a high-end Mercedes convertible. The dedicated savings account, the one for David's cancer treatment. I opened my banking app on my phone, my fingers shaking so violently I could barely type my password. I navigated to the dedicated account. The balance, which should have been just over $250,000, was now a shocking $70,000. $250,000 gone. Not for life-saving treatment, not for a desperate fight for survival, for a new car for his mistress. The world tilted on its axis. The cancer, the hope, the sacrifice, the constant exhaustion, the fear. It had all been a facade, a monstrous, calculated lie. He had taken the money I had saved for his life, money I had agonized over, money I had sacrificed my own dreams for, and he had poured it into a lavish lifestyle with another woman. The Miami trial? A fiction. The final tests? A cover-up. The invigorated demeanor? The joy? Not from a renewed hope for life, but from a clandestine affair and the thrill of his heinous deception. I stumbled backwards, collapsing onto a kitchen chair, the iPad clattering to the floor. My hands flew to my mouth, not to stifle a scream, but to suppress a wave of nauseating, bone-deep revulsion. The silence of the house, which had once felt comforting, now felt like a vast, empty chamber, echoing with the resounding clang of my shattered trust. The man I loved, the man I was fighting for, was a stranger, a monster, and I, in my naive devotion, had helped him fund his cruelest betrayal. The engine of his infidelity had been fueled by my love, my sacrifice, and the very money I had earmarked for his survival. Chapter 3. The Ghost of a Marriage. The hours that followed David's supposed office visit were a blur of cold fury and gut-wrenching despair. The red Mercedes, shimmering in the photos on the iPad, became a monument to his treachery. Each sleek curve, each polished surface, felt like a deliberate insult, paid for with the very hope I had held for his life. When David finally returned that evening, I met him at the door, the iPad clutched in my trembling hand. He walked in, humming a cheerful tune, a smile on his face, oblivious. "Long day, Sarah. I'm starving. What's for dinner?" His casual tone, his assumed innocence, snapped something inside me. "Don't you dare," I whispered, my voice raw, barely recognizable. "Don't you dare pretend this is normal." He stopped, his smile faltering as he saw my face, the iPad. His eyes widened, a flicker of panic replacing his feigned nonchalance. "Sarah, what's wrong? What is that?" I thrust the iPad at him, open to the messages, the photos of the car, the bank transfers. "This is what's wrong, David. This is what you've been doing. With my money, the money for your cancer treatment. You bought a car for your mistress." His face drained of color. The practiced composure of the successful architect crumbled, revealing a man caught in the most heinous of lies. He stammered, tried to grab the iPad, to deny. But the evidence was damning, undeniable. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain what, David?" I screamed, the sound finally tearing from my throat, raw and anguished. "Explain how you lied about a clinical trial, how you let me sacrifice our retirement, my dreams for a non-existent cure. How you took the money I saved for your life and gave it to her. For a car? For a lavish life? While I sat here, worrying myself sick, praying for your recovery." He fell silent, his gaze dropping to the floor, unable to meet my eyes. The truth, in all its ugliness, stood starkly between us, a chasm that could never be bridged. The man I had loved, nurtured, and sacrificed for was a ghost, a cruel illusion. The marriage we had built was a crumbling ruin. "Get out," I choked, pointing a trembling finger towards the door. "Get out of my house, now." He tried to argue, to plead, to offer some pathetic excuse. But his words were meaningless, drowned out by the roar of my shattered trust. I stood firm, my pain morphing into an iron resolve. He eventually packed a small bag, his movements slow and defeated, and left. The silence he left behind was cold, hollow, but also, strangely, filled with a newfound clarity. The next day, I contacted our financial advisor, John. I laid out the devastating truth, every agonizing detail. John, a kind man who had known us for years, was horrified. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "I can't believe this. I truly can't." He confirmed the transfers from the dedicated account, the large sums, the Miami car dealership. He helped me freeze remaining accounts to protect what little we had left. The financial devastation was immense, but the emotional wound was deeper, more catastrophic. I also contacted an attorney, a divorce attorney. There was no going back from this. The betrayal was too profound, too insidious. Not only had he been unfaithful, he had used my love, my fear, my sacrifice as a weapon against me. He had weaponized his own supposed illness. It was a level of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. The legal process began, a grueling, emotionally draining battle. David, despite the undeniable evidence, initially tried to deny, to minimize, to paint me as the hysterical wife. But the digital footprint was irrefutable. The messages, the photos, the bank transfers, they told a story of calculated deceit. The cancer. That was the detail that gnawed at me, a persistent, sickening worry. Was he truly ill, or was that a complete fabrication too? The doctor, Dr. Evans, had confirmed the initial diagnosis. Had he faked the subsequent Miami trial update? Had he truly been sick at all? The thought made me nauseous. I found Dr. Evans' number and called her, my voice tight with trepidation. "Dr. Evans, this is Sarah Miller. I need to ask you about David's treatment, specifically the Miami clinical trial." There was a pause on the other end. "Miss Miller," she said, her voice cautious, "Mr. Miller has chosen to pursue an alternative course of treatment here in Atlanta. He informed us he would not be proceeding with the Boston trial." "Alternative course?" I pressed, my heart sinking further. "What alternative course?" He simply stated he was opting for palliative care locally and would manage his symptoms here in Atlanta, she replied, a hint of confusion in her voice. He informed us he felt the Boston trial was too aggressive for his wishes. Palliative care. Managing symptoms. No aggressive treatment. He was still sick, but he had chosen not to fight, not to pursue the best chance at life. While letting me believe he was undergoing cutting-edge experimental treatment, he was still dying, but he had chosen to spend the money I saved for his life on a lavish affair, on a car for his mistress, rather than on his own survival. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a ghost of a marriage, haunted by a ghost of a man, making a choice to die a wealthy man, just not a healthy one, while maintaining a lie. My anger, fueled by this final, devastating revelation, hardened into an unyielding resolve. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the profound injustice of it all. I had poured my heart, my finances, my very soul into saving him, and he had squandered it on a whim, on a fleeting pleasure. The ghost of our marriage would not haunt me. I would not allow it. I would fight for every penny, for every shred of dignity, and I would rebuild my life from the ashes of his monstrous deception, stronger and wiser than before. Chapter 4: Reclaiming the Narrative. The divorce proceedings were a brutal confirmation of the adage that truth is stranger and often crueler than fiction. David, facing irrefutable evidence, eventually settled, but not before prolonging the agony with delaying tactics and half-hearted attempts at reconciliation that rang hollow with deceit. The house was sold, the assets divided, and I managed to reclaim a portion of the funds he had squandered, enough to rebuild, but far less than the original $250,000 I had so painstakingly saved. The emotional cost was immeasurable. The financial advisor, John, who had been genuinely appalled by David's actions, helped me navigate the complexities of rebuilding my financial future. He advised me on sound investments, on smart budgeting, on how to protect myself from future vulnerabilities. He even connected me with a network of women who had experienced similar betrayals, offering a lifeline of shared understanding and support. But the deeper wound was the emotional one, the feeling of profound foolishness, of having been so utterly blind to the true nature of the man I loved. The betrayal wasn't just about the money or the affair. It was about the weaponization of his own illness, the cynical manipulation of my deepest fears and hopes. It left a profound scar on my trust, not just in men, but in my own judgment. I sought therapy, finding a compassionate and insightful counselor who helped me unravel the tangled knot of grief, anger, and self-blame. She reminded me that my love and sacrifice had been genuine, a testament to my character, not a flaw. The deception was his, the responsibility entirely his. She helped me reclaim my narrative, to see myself not as a foolish victim, but as a survivor of an extraordinary act of cruelty. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild my life in Atlanta. I immersed myself in my freelance graphic design work, finding solace and purpose in creation. I reconnected with old friends, some of whom had quietly suspected something was amiss with David's sudden recovery. Their unwavering support was a balm to my wounded soul. I joined a book club, started taking pottery classes, and even adopted a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever mix named Gus, whose unconditional love became a comforting presence in my now quiet home. The news of David's actual health continued to reach me through mutual acquaintances, though I purposefully avoided direct contact. He was indeed pursuing palliative care, his condition slowly deteriorating. The woman, Lisa, eventually left him, reportedly after realizing the extent of his financial ruin and the moral bankruptcy of his actions. She took the Mercedes with her. The cruel irony was not lost on me. He had bought her a car with his life savings, and she had driven off into the sunset, leaving him alone to face his final decline. The engine of his betrayal, it seemed, had ultimately driven him to a solitary end. The anger, once a fiery inferno, slowly cooled into a quiet, simmering resolve. There was no satisfaction in his decline, only a profound sadness for the wasted potential, the destructive choices. I found no joy in his misery. My focus was on my own healing, my own future. One afternoon, a little over a year after the divorce, I was walking Gus in a local park in Sandy Springs, Georgia. The sun was warm, the air crisp. I saw a woman sitting alone on a bench, looking distraught, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her phone. Something in her posture, her palpable despair, resonated deeply with my own recent past. I hesitated, then approached her cautiously. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Are you all right? You look upset." She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. I just found out my husband. He took our savings, the money we were saving for our daughter's college, and he bought a new house for another woman." Her voice broke, thick with the same raw pain I knew so intimately. My heart ached for her. I sat beside her, Gus nudging her hand gently. "I know that feeling," I said, my voice soft but firm with conviction. "I know exactly what that feels like. My husband, he took money I had saved for his cancer treatment and bought a car for his mistress." Her eyes widened in shock, then in a glimmer of recognition. You do?" And in that shared moment of vulnerability, of profound, unexpected connection, a new purpose began to solidify within me. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a witness. I had a story to tell, a lesson to share, and a unique ability to offer empathy and practical guidance to others navigating the treacherous waters of marital betrayal and financial deceit. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but my journey through its wreckage had gifted me an unexpected strength, a profound clarity, and a fierce determination to help other women reclaim their own narratives. I spent the next hour talking to her, sharing parts of my story, offering advice, listening to her pain. I told her about John, the financial advisor, about finding legal counsel, about the importance of self-care and therapy. I told her she was not alone, that her pain was valid, and that she would, eventually, find her way through this. Her tears gradually subsided, replaced by a glimmer of resolve. As I walked Gus home, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I felt a quiet sense of purpose settle over me. The betrayal had been a cruel engine of destruction, but from its wreckage, I was building something new, something meaningful. I was reclaiming my narrative, not just for myself, but for every woman who had ever felt blindsided, betrayed, and alone. My voice, once silenced by shock and shame, was now ready to become a beacon of strength and resilience for others. Chapter 5: A New Engine of Hope. The encounter in the park was a pivotal moment, a clear signpost on my path forward. It transformed my personal healing into a broader mission. I realized that my experience, however painful, had equipped me with a unique understanding and empathy for women navigating similar betraying landscapes. The raw wound of David's deceit had in its healing formed a profound strength, a new kind of resilience. I started small. I met with the woman from the park, whose name was Eleanor, for coffee. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our fears, our steps towards rebuilding. Our conversations, born of shared pain, quickly blossomed into a powerful friendship. Eleanor introduced me to a few other women in our Atlanta community who had experienced similar betrayals. Some financial, some emotional, some a devastating combination of both. We began meeting informally, a small circle of survivors. We called ourselves the Phoenix Circle, a name that symbolized our collective rise from the ashes of betrayal. What started as coffee and conversation soon evolved into structured support meetings. We shared resources, trusted financial advisors, empathetic therapists, divorce attorneys specializing in complex cases. We offered each other practical advice, emotional support, and most importantly, a judgment-free space to process our anger, grief, and fear. I, drawing on my graphic design background, created simple, empowering materials for our group, checklists for financial security after betrayal, guidelines for emotional self-care, and affirmations to rebuild self-worth. I leveraged my own story, not to dwell on the past, but to illuminate a path forward. I spoke openly about the shame I initially felt, the self-blame, and how I learned to dismantle those damaging narratives. Their betrayal is never a reflection of your worth, I would tell the women, my voice firm with conviction. It's a reflection of their character or lack thereof. My therapist became a quiet consultant, offering insights and resources that helped me structure the group effectively and ethically. John, my financial advisor, volunteered his time to conduct workshops for the group on financial literacy and rebuilding credit after marital financial abuse. He saw firsthand the devastating impact of such betrayals and was committed to empowering these women. As the Phoenix Circle grew, word spread throughout the Southeast United States. Women from neighboring states, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, reached out seeking connection and support. We started offering online meetings, extending our reach, creating a virtual network of empowered women. My story, once a private anguish, became a public testament to resilience, a powerful narrative shared through podcasts, local news features, and eventually a book I began writing titled The Unbought Life, about navigating financial and emotional betrayal. The fate of David, though no longer central to my life, continued to reach me. He had indeed succumbed to his illness, alone and estranged, his choices having isolated him completely. There was no joy in his passing, only a quiet melancholy for the life he had squandered, the relationships he had destroyed. The red Mercedes, the cruel engine of his betrayal, was seen by many as a symbol of his ultimate ruin. It was a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of deceit. My life, once defined by the shock of his betrayal, was now characterized by a vibrant sense of purpose. I had not just survived, I had thrived. The money I had saved for his life, which he had diverted to buy a car for another woman, had ironically become the fuel for my new engine of hope. It was the catalyst that pushed me to reclaim my strength, to find my voice, and to create a community of support for others. My relationships with friends and family deepened. They saw my transformation, my newfound resilience. My adopted dog, Gus, remained my faithful companion, a source of simple, unconditional love. I continued my graphic design work, now with a renewed passion, channeling my creativity into projects that aligned with my values. I even explored painting, a long-dormant passion, finding immense joy in expressing emotions on canvas. Looking back, the memory of that day in Dr. Evans's office, the initial diagnosis, the profound fear for David's life, it all felt like a distant dream, a ghost of a past life. The money, the $250,000, had not saved his life, but it had irrevocably changed mine. It had forced me to confront a devastating truth, to dismantle a life built on lies, and to reconstruct it with integrity and strength. The red Mercedes, once a symbol of my deepest humiliation, now served as a powerful, ironic reminder of the journey I had undertaken. It represented the destructive choices of one man, but also the transformative power of a woman's resilience. I had been betrayed, deeply, but I had refused to be broken. Instead, I had taken the wreckage of my past and built a new engine, a new path forward, one that carried me and countless other women towards an unbought life, a life brimming with authenticity, purpose, and profound hope. The echoes of his betrayal still lingered, but they were now overshadowed by the resounding roar of my own strength, driving me forward into a future I built, brick by painful brick, on my own terms.